So in the last video on the Ukraine-Russia conflict, we talked through essentially the major events of the 2014-2015. This video we'll be completing right up until the actual invasion. Next time we'll talk a little bit about the war, what little we can actually understand about what's going on, and some analysis of making sense of what's happened and what's going to happen going forward. So, September 2015, a truce goes into place that would hold for about 6 weeks, which is one of the better attempts at making things go. Throughout 2016, essentially things would stabilize. There is going to be no change of territory, and Ukraine suffers about 211 combat losses, which is actually pretty low for what's going on along the frontier. At this point, most of the fighting is going on between separatists and Ukraine, but there are several, probably in the neighborhood of 3,000 Russian observers and probably advisors functioning in Donbass. Likely, they're assisting with artillery support and other things like that, training, etc. They might actually be getting involved too, but we don't have any overt Russian casualties to prove that they're directly involved. In 2017, in January, the Battle of Avdiivka. This is kind of an interesting spot because it's one of the bigger blow-ups. Lasts for about 6 days. The Guardian reported that from Ukrainian soldiers that Ukraine actually provoked the attack to draw the separatists out of their strong positions. About 24 die on either side over the 6-day period. Ukraine reported occupying better positions at the close of the battle. February 2017, Putin decrees that driver's license and vehicle registration issued by the separatist governments were recognized as valid in Russia. Numerous ceasefires were declared and immediately collapsed, with both sides accusing each other of instigation. January of 2018, Ukraine passes a law to reintegrate the whole of the Donbass and also gave the president the power to use armed forces anywhere within the confines of Ukraine without further parliamentary approval. Russia complained bitterly about these. Continuing in 2018, actions with Ukraine states the year ending with 2018 actions. Ukraine states that the year ends with Ukraine reoccupying most of the gray zone. The gray zone is an area. It's basically a little bit either side of the line of contact, where essentially people live still, but it's almost impossible to get them services because most of the utilities have been cut from either side. In June of 2019, Russia issues passports to the separatists uh, without actually naming the regions, but it's considered to be a ramping up of essentially saying that they are de facto Russian citizens without exactly saying it in those words. In October of 2019, The Stenmeyer formula is put into place. This is another attempt to make the Minsk agreements work. This one has some effects. There is some stabilization that occurs, less fighting. Both sides start performing prisoner exchanges that were supposed to be happening earlier under the Minsk agreements. And actually both sides start getting involved in demining particular areas, pulling up the anti-personnel and vehicle mines. Once again, per the Minsk agreement, they agree to elections and autonomy, but Ukraine is insisting that they will not honor the results of any elections unless they know for a fact all the Russians have left the separatist areas. Uh, 2020 March, another ceasefire occurs. Attacks and deaths dramatically drop. The late 2020 crossings end up shutting down, essentially the ability of people to cross back and forth gets stopped, presumably due to COVID. Some suggest ulterior motives. With the crossing shut down, the ceasefire breaks down again with low-level fighting breaking out. So, February 2021, the Russian Defense Ministry announced the deployment of 3,000 paratroopers on the border for large-scale exercises. The announcement was made following the Ukrainian government's crackdown on Viktor Medvedchuk earlier that month. Medvedchuk was a leading pro-Russian Ukrainian opposition politician and tycoon with close personal ties to Vladimir Putin. So essentially, he was a candidate in parliament aiming towards the presidency. Ukraine cracked down on his party due to it having ties to Russia. And this is a picture of him, so you see how far the crackdown actually went. March and April of 2021, Russian armed forces began massing thousands of personnel and military equipment near Russia's border with Ukraine and in Crimea. This precipitated an international crisis due to concerns of an invasion. Satellite imagery showed movements of armor, missiles, and heavy weaponry. And then troops would end up being partially withdrawn by June of 2021. Beginning in March, NATO began a series of military exercises known as Defender Europe 2021. The military exercise was one of the largest NATO-led military exercise in Europe for decades. Included the near simultaneous operations across 30 training areas in 12 countries, utilizing the troops from 27 different nations. Russia criticized NATO for holding the exercise and deployed troops to its western border during the duration of the exercise. March 24th, Zelensky announced Ukraine's intent to take back Crimea, mentioning, among others, military means as being a potential method. The next day, Russia sent troops to the Ukrainian border. A second buildup began in October 2021, this time with more soldiers and more deployments on new fronts. By December, over 100,000 troops were massed around Ukraine on three sides, including Belarus and Crimea. In December of 2021, Russia advanced 2 draft treaties that contain requests for what referred to be security guarantees, including a legally binding promise that Ukraine would not join NATO and a reduction in NATO troops and materials stationed in Eastern Europe. Russia said the potential for military action if these actions weren't taken were possible, without specifying exactly what those military actions were. And the United States responded back saying if Russia used military force, we would respond in kind. In January, the U.S. rejected the demand to keep Ukraine out of NATO. Intelligence briefed several allies with specific reference to 16 February as a potential starting date for a ground invasion. Following these announcements, the U.S. ordered most of its diplomatic staff and military instructors in Ukraine to evacuate. On February 21st, 2022, Russia officially recognized the 2 breakaway regions in eastern Ukraine, the Donetsk People's Republic and the Luhansk People's Republic, as independent states, and deployed troops to the Donbass in a move interpreted as Russia's effective withdrawal from the Minsk agreements. The breakaway republics were recognized in their boundaries of their respective Ukrainian oblasts. All right, so what do you think about some of the actions going on there? Some of these things, new information to you? Does it alter your perceptions as to how the crisis proceeded? Go ahead and comment below any thoughts you have on that. Please smash the like button. If you're not a subscriber and the YouTube algorithm brought you here, please consider subscribing. And if you know somebody who might find this interesting, please share it with them. Thanks for spending time with me this evening. Hope to see you again in a future video.